I would say it's the closest thing to a universal language that we
That we still
have.
share. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm-
Like, did somebody tell all these owners what's going on? And I say that specifically in jest, but also in reference to the last 2 years and the circus that it has been.
The pandering is what should be mocked again and again and again because of how thin that veil is and just how cheap it really feels.
Yeah. I'm just going to tell you, I'm very cynical about this.
Because there's so much money to be made in those kinds of conversations.
Man, it just seems so messy. Whoa, wait a minute. The news you just dropped on me is crazy. I need to put my computer down for this one. We need to talk about this. Welcome to Kingdom Thinking, everybody. I'm Hansel. This is Josh, and this breaking news to me is really. I mean, it's caused a reaction. So, show me the video.
All right,
and then let's talk about this. Yeah, so I mean that was really interesting. When did this video come out?
June 28th.
Okay, so just last week, a few days ago. This is really interesting to me for a few reasons. The NFL's platforms and postures throughout the last few years has been a topic of discussion in the media for a lot of people, and it is. I mean, it's getting pretty like circus-like, in my opinion. And what I want to discuss with you is not only a reaction to this specific commercial, but the response that we have to corporations latching themselves on to ethical or moral issues, and the suspicion or not, or credibility that we should adopt based on some of this stuff. So, I mean, what was some of your initial reaction to this commercial?
Yeah, I vacillate on this topic largely because I think it's good when somebody puts up a thing that says like, "Hey, we don't want kids to kill themselves." Okay, right?
So to be fair,
to them.
Tell me about the end of the commercial.
So at the end of that commercial, right? It's one of the things that you're seeing a lot is like the incendiary rhetoric of like, "Oh my God, the NFL is transgender," right? Like that's a big deal. We should boycott them. Coming from kind of some of the more conservative voices,
right?
And yes, they do make that statement, but at the same time, right at the end of that video, they talk about how students or teenagers who have at least one open and affirming parent, right, that reduces the suicide risk by 40% for LGBT plus teens, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big deal, right? Yeah. I think that's an important thing. You don't have to be like over the top, super excited about everything, right, to not want kids to kill themselves.
Yes,
and
agreed.
So I think just to kind of tip the scales of conversation.
Yeah, you're like, now wait a minute.
Yeah, it's just like, we got to be a little bit careful about how we just kind of run into that.
Here's my first reaction, to be honest with you. Did somebody tell Jerry Jones about this commercial? Like, did somebody tell all these owners what's going on? And I say that specifically in jest, but also in reference to the last 2 years and the circus that it has been with Colin Kaepernick, with kneeling or not for the flag, with coming out or not for the national anthem, and the responses to the George Floyd murder and everything thereafter with Black Lives Matter. It has been incredible to me how loudly the silence, particularly of the owners and the front office of these teams, has the message that has been sent to the public about what they care about.
Right.
And so I'm just going to tell you, I'm very cynical about this, meaning I'm maybe a better way to say it was suspicious. I'm suspicious that the owners and the megaphone that the commissioner is and their marketing team or whatever is simply not trying to protect their pockets. And where now your fan base isn't simply white conservative men, right? But your fan base is a lot more diverse or whatever. How convenient that now these commercials are coming out and this kind of thing. So push back a little bit. Where do you feel like, okay, and what am I missing?
Yeah, I don't actually have too much of a pushback there. I find it hard to reconcile those two things. I think somebody might say that it's a non sequitur conversation, right? The conversation around the flag is a different conversation entirely around LGBT issues,
fair.
right?
That's fair.
And I think that's a fair point. But people in the LGBT community would also say that, hey, kneeling, is a good thing, and you shouldn't come out for the national anthem, right? So people within those minority communities may not feel that those issues are necessarily as separate.
Apples and oranges, maybe?
It can be, depending on which way you're looking at it. But if you're in those communities, you might see them as kind of like two cards in the same hand, right? And so I think there's some room to be said there. Maybe the conversation of being charitable towards people as they learn and grow, as markets change. But, I'm not going to be the guy who sits to try and defend like 32 old white guy billionaires. It's like, that's not, look, I don't think being a billionaire makes you a bad person, right? Like, I'm not that far over in that camp.
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea is like, it feels a little bit weird. It feels a bit like an about face, right? From 5 years ago.
Yes.
And
like a rainbow on the NFL logo? Like, who could have seen that coming?
Yeah, I mean, they've been doing that for a little bit now. It's not like brand new. But what I think is fascinating is like, I find myself curious as to why there isn't greater celebration of stuff for more than just the month of June, right?
Okay. So there's that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we have such a propensity to compartmentalize
and commercialize.
Yeah, and there's money to be made at the end of the day on all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And
I'm fine with that.
I think that's
just
just a driving
pretend,
factor. Yeah.
Like, oh, look, like this is progress.
Yeah.
And this is great. And the NFL's changed. That seems very naive to me. Now, so like, look, the roles are changing a little bit here, right?
Sure.
Usually you're the more, what's the word? Kind of fired up about kind of stuff.
Sure.
And I'm like, well, yeah, maybe we should be closer to center. I don't feel very close to center on this one.
Yeah, that's fine.
And that started for me. Do you remember the Nike ad with Kaepernick?
Yes.
What's the slogan?
What does it stand for? Something, even if it costs you everything?
Yeah,
something
like that. And then they're like the memes, right?
Yeah.
On everything.
Yeah.
Was great. But I think this is a larger conversation about corporate culture.
Yeah, exploiting movements.
Right.
Yeah.
And how it exploits movements for money.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be naive about it, but I will say this. I don't think we have to say it's an all or nothing.
Correct.
So if you're saying in the same breath, oh, look, we're all for this, and we don't want LGBTQIA plus teens to kill themselves, we don't have to say it's all garbage.
Correct.
So fair. Talk to me a little bit more about, so how do we respond to this ethical dilemma? Where as Christians, we should have ethical convictions about things that are, at least somewhat consistent, and we can disagree on convictions and stuff. That's fine.
Right.
But like, what's a fair analysis then?
Yeah, I really struggle with the NFL and Nike and that kind of whole world specifically, right? Because, look, you're closing in on being like in the high hundreds of billions, almost near the $1 trillion valuation mark as a company, right? They're worth so much money. They generate so much capital. And, you talk to former NFL players, right? And some of them feel like it's exploitative labor, right? Like almost like modern day slave labor stuff. And some people would kind of push back against that and say, like, you're making millions of dollars, relax.
Yeah.
There. And, but I mean, there's a voice from both sides because none of that money's ever really guaranteed. If they get pulled cut easily, right, without anybody owing you anything. And I think what is particularly interesting about the NFL specifically over and against these other leagues, like the NBA, for example, is like the NFL, to me, feigns allyship while in reality maintaining a really tight grasp on how their product is distributed.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So you look at the way that the NFL used to run. It used to be a September through February kind of sport, right? And as they have decided to dominate the market more recently, they have moved things to position themselves as such, right? So preseason now goes back to August there, and then you have the training camp stuff that happens in the summer that now competes with the NBA deadline, right? That moves them, the NBA trading deadline opening when it happens in July, whatever that is, middle of July, when free agents can move in the NBA market now. Well, now NFL has become a year-round sport in America, and as they continue to dominate
it's a national religion.
Well, and they keep a tight hold on how the message gets delivered. And this is what I think is important. The NBA players like LeBron James have a massive stake and influence over the totality of the league, its direction, where it goes, how things happen, right? Like,
Yes.
they canceled
They're part of
games
the
last
culture.
year after the George Floyd murder, right?
Yeah.
Like during the Kenosha riots and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Like, they
yeah.
canceled. That would never happen in the NFL.
Okay.
The NFL owners would never let a game be canceled there because there's so much money to be made in those kinds of conversations. And so what I struggle with there is, like, it's the allyship when it's convenient for the bottom line.
Interesting.
Because it's only through the lens that the owners and Roger Goodell allow it to be seen in. And that's what I really struggle with, right? And it's
That's
the same thing with Nike, right? It was just like, look, we're all in on the Kaepernick thing. We think he's great. We think he's awesome, blah, 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 blah. And then they've been linked to, like, forced labor of the Uyghur Muslims in China, right, for their shoes.
It's not good.
There. Or them and Coca-Cola. Yeah, them and Coca-Cola lobbied against a Xinjiang forced labor bill, right? They actually spent money to prevent a bill passing through the House so that way, like, it's insane to me, the moral and ethical disconnect that these companies have.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you in the hypercritical tone that you're taking
like
with this
gut
stuff,
reaction.
because it's so right in front of your face there. But on the other side of that, Nike and the NFL are culture and trend setters in this country, right? And so in one breath, right, they will, like, pat Kaepernick on the back and say you're awesome and do great stuff, and then, like, exploit Muslims in a developing world for their shoes. But in America, that does move the needle forward in some direction,
That is
right? Like,
crazy to fathom.
So there's a mixture of those things where it is very condemnable, and it should be condemned loudly and vociferously without a doubt. But at the same time, they are moving the cultural needle forward in terms of inclusivity, being a little bit more open to stuff, because without them, right, like, sports is the de facto culture change in American society, right? It's like,
I would say it's the closest thing to a universal language that we
still share. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you look at, Jackie Robinson is a great example of this,
Yes.
right? Like, breaking the color barrier there.
Yeah.
Or in the 30s when, who was it? The world heavyweight boxing champion there.
I'm thinking of Jesse Owens.
There.
but
Oh,
that
yeah.
was-
Jesse
was- that
Owens, sure.
was
Even in World War II.
40s?
There. Yeah. And, right. So these black athletes did amazing things, right? And they moved the needle
that
forward
was
on racial
directly
relations.
linked to the social situation and civil rights, and even before that.
Yeah, and then certainly, like, the church comes up behind that, right, with Martin Luther King Jr. and leaders from that community, and so sports plays a crucial role in this. So the question that I am very concerned with is, like,
is it a sword or a weapon?
How much
or,
of it?
like,
Well, how much of the BS do we tolerate for the sake of actual progress that's occurring on the other side, right? Like, how much of that is genuine crap versus, like, hey, there's some good stuff coming out of this, right? Do you throw the baby out with the bathwater? I mean, it's the age-old question of whether or not the ends justify the means, right, in that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. I think what makes it the most confusing to me is the good that's happening here is on the backs of the horrific things happening to the laborers in other countries, right?
Yeah.
So, man, it just seems so messy.
Right. And in the same breath, we'll critique holidays like July 4th, right? Because it's like, we came to this land and we stole it and it was terrible in the way that we treated Native Americans and things like that. And that's true, right? But there has been a lot of good that has come out of America, right? Like, America has helped lift the world out of poverty, and great things have happened as a result of that. And so this is not a new question, right?
Gotcha.
Like, this is as old as time is, as old as humanity is itself, really, in this kind of thing. But it's like, when a corporation like the NFL, like Nike, like Apple, whatever it is, right, throws the Pride logo into their banner, right, on LinkedIn, everything went gay for the month of June, right? Like, everything was Pride, everything was this, everything was great. And then on July 1st, everything disappears. Yeah. There, it just goes, it's like, okay, on to the next branding thing, right? Like, it's taken movements and it's turned them into brand stuff.
Right.
They're over, instead of, like, deeply entrenching itself, or, dude, it's like, even, for Disney Plus for a while, for Netflix, it was like, hey, find out, more about, like, black creators.
The suggestions?
Yeah. And it was like, this is great. And then it, like, disappeared in April.
It did.
And so I just don't know where to put that emotionally. It tosses and turns me in a way that just gets me super fired up. So it's like, the question that we have to answer is,
what's the threshold?
Yeah. What do we take in this?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for it. I mean, I watch football.
Mm-hmm.
I like football. I have friends who boycotted the NFL.
Sure.
And their conviction was, I will not consume the product because of where it's coming from.
Yeah, and you know what's hilarious about that? No one cares. No one cares about those people who boycotted because the ratings just continue to grow.
Yeah.
So it's like you can take this principled stance on your own as a person,
Yeah.
and that makes a difference in your world and maybe the immediate world around you.
Yeah.
But it's a drop in the ocean.
Right. It doesn't affect their bottom line.
Not even a little bit.
Now, I respect somebody who will take that principle.
Sure.
Because it's not just about the pragmatic effect, right? It's about being true to doing what you say you believe. Now, in the deepest, darkest, worst feelings I had about the NFL, I didn't stop watching games.
Sure.
Like, NFL games are exciting for the most part.
They put out a great
unless
product.
You're watching.
They put out a spectacular
my Raiders lose to the Broncos and Chiefs and Chargers. My goodness. So I don't know, because I think the question is on both a personal level. Does that mean I should stop watching games if I really feel this way?
Sure.
How can a society stand up against the latching of the values?
Yeah,
by
the exploitation.
Right. So how would you do that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to have a real conversation about this one. The first one is by leaders of movements not jumping into bed with corporations, right? And this is a hard one there. So I think about the Raiders player who came out as gay, right, during the month of June, and was so innocuous in the way that he announced it, right, on his Instagram. Like, it wasn't this fanfare. It wasn't this over the top. It wasn't this look at me.
It was in his backyard, right?
And, in Pennsylvania or something like that. Yeah. And my thought is he's going to get to training camp and people are going to be like, what's up, dude? And I think the ultimate question of the majority of those guys are going to be concerned with are like, how good are you at your job, right? Can we trust you as a tight end to go catch a ball when we're 3rd and 7 and we need to cross the sticks? Or how well are you going to protect Derek Carr, right? Well, what does Carr make in a year now? Like $25 million a year, something like that?
I don't know.
Right? And so it's like, how well are you going to protect that guy?
Right.
And that, to me, is far more effective for normalizing a conversation than like megaphone brand awareness that something like the NFL does.
So here's my next question. A tangent that I see to that is, how do you think we can view and caution against or use as a tool that kind of influence and market dominance as the church and the people who are the ambassadors of the gospel, and to not view the gospel as a product we sell or market or brand, but as a truth that we want to influence people.
Yeah, I don't know that it comes from a top-down perspective, right? The NFL is a top-down approach.
Yeah, of course. So I'm talking about a tangent, right?
Yeah,
I'm not saying this is a one-to-one.
No. So I think it's got to be the opposite play of how you would try and do that if you were trying to use the NFL, right? I think it's got to come from bottom up.
Gotcha. So you would say, if, I don't know, for church leadership, church planting, or just regular Christians who are thinking like, this is interesting, look at this strategy, right? It's got all these, flaws, limitations, or whatever, and yet it's got some level of effectiveness to move either cultural awareness or these kinds of things.
Well, I mean, think about just the way that we make fun of the NFL all the time for this stuff, right? They get roasted all the time. Like, Goodell is a clown. Everybody
on many shirts,
Yeah. That's a Barstool Sports thing, right? And so it's like, this dude has just been harangued there by his inability to like handle, and he bobbled all of these PR nightmares, right? And so I think you'll see that the Raiders player will do more to move that conversation forward than somebody like Roger Goodell would, right? And so I think for the church, right, to answer that question specifically, it's like the church just lives. The church just lives it out normally, because the NFL deserves to be made fun of, right? Like, Nike deserves to be made fun of on these conversations there. Not because what they're doing is so atrocious, right? Like, it's not bad to not want kids to kill themselves. Like, that's a good thing, regardless of where you stand on that issue of homosexuality. Like, Jesus doesn't want kids to die in any way, shape, or form. But the pandering, right? The pandering is what should be mocked again and again and again because of how thin that veil is and just how cheap it really feels, and the same thing will happen to Christians there if we try and like be cool or outcompete Hollywood or whatever it is. It's like, dude,
right.
Like, we're not, at least from the church level, right? Like, this.
You're not going to win.
Never. Because it's like, so I think about, for me as a speaker, right? I preach regularly in our main service. I put on events there. I do a bunch of things.
Are you trying to be hip?
Dude, I couldn't be if I wanted to, first of all, but that's because of me. But like even other cool pastors, right? Like evangelicals fall into this trap all the time of worshiping these mega church celebrity pastors.
Yeah.
And then when something goes wrong, it's like, oh my God, like the whole kingdom of Christendom has tumbled, right? When a pastor falls or commits a sin or whatever it is. And so it's like we get made fun of on Instagram memes in the same way that the NFL has Instagram memes made about it there. And so living things authentically will go a much farther way than simple pandering, right? Regardless of if you're the NFL or if you're the church or whatever.
I like it.
Whatever situation
I think I can
yourself.
agree. I agree with that. What do you guys think? Leave us a comment. Fair or unfair? What do you think of this response to that NFL commercial? And do you think we can learn as Christians and the church of how to model some of the truths of the gospel in society so as to gain some of these benefits and learn, but also not fall into these traps? We'll catch you guys next time on Kingdom Thinking. Make sure to tell us what you think and check us out on the app.